Asia, the world's biggest continent, from Arabian desert to Himalayan mountains and tropical islands of the Far East. It really does have pretty much everything. And yeah, I've done a bit of travelling around Asia, by which I mean I've been to Turkey on holiday twice. So yeah, I've basically done the equivalent of dipping in my little toe. But with the power of video games, I don't need to catch a long haul flight or embark on a massive road trip to visit the rest of this vast continent. But is it possible to find a game set in every single country in Asia? This is the third episode in my series where I'm trying to visit every single country in the world in video games. Like the previous two episodes, I'm going to try and use my own collection of console games, with games from the PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, Xbox 360 and Xbox One. And possibly mobile gaming as a last resort? Couple of rules: I'm only allowed to use each game once, otherwise this would have been way too easy and much less interesting. But I am allowed to use games that I've already featured in my other two videos, in Europe and South America. Here is the list of the 49 countries I'm going to attempt to visit. This series has told me that it's impossible to draw a map of the world that makes everybody happy. This region in particular has a lot of disputed borders, and countries that aren't recognised by others. So if this map or inclusion of some of the countries offends you, all I can do is apologise. This is just a light-hearted video on a very dumb gaming channel. And please leave comments down below if I've missed out your favourite game set in a particular country, or if there's one you think that's more appropriate, especially if you live there or visited on vacation. I am eventually going to do a supercut where I visit every country in the world and could possibly change some of the games, add in new information or correct mistakes. Right, where on earth do we begin? Well, how about Japan? The country that brought us Nintendo and the Sony PlayStation. Japan has the world's third biggest gaming economy, so it makes sense that Japanese developers will set games in their own country, because it will give players a familiar backdrop. But it has by far the most games set in it compared to the rest of the countries in this region. The country is also just gorgeous, with beautiful shrines, towering mountains, and pink cherry blossom that a lot of level designers seem to think flower all year round. Japan also has an interesting history, filled with all kinds of awesome things like ninjas, samurai, shogun and shinobi. They all feel like they were made for video games, but with so many games to choose from, which one should I go for? I know I should really go for a game by a Japanese developer, such as Persona 5. Games don't get more Japanese than this. It's a turn-based JRPG, set in the capital city of Tokyo. And I had an absolutely great time playing through it for a recent video, but it's not my favourite game set in Japan. So instead, I'm going to go for Ghost of Tsushima and Ghost of Yotei. Okay, so I've already broken one of my rules by choosing two games, but there are things I prefer about Tsushima, and there are things I prefer about Yotei. Both games follow a revenge quest, as we attempt to drive out an occupying force from our homeland. There's gorgeous scenery, epic katana fights, and tasteful butt shots. And both are definitely influenced by old samurai movies, rather than actual history, particularly the films by director Akira Kurosawa. And it definitely doesn't hide this. There's even a Kurosawa mode. The scenery we see in the games is a heavily romanticised one, which makes it quite hard to compare to real life. Ghost of Yotei takes place on the northern island of Hokkaido, but a lot of the beautiful grasslands we see in the game now look like this, the Hokkaido capital of Sapporo. But we can find a few real life landmarks, like the stunning volcano of Mount Yotei. It dominates the landscape and is basically a character in its own right. We can also find Shikotsu Toya National Park and the perfectly round Lake Katara. But the vast majority of scenery and landmarks we find in the game are completely fictional. But who cares when it looks this gorgeous? You only get to explore small parts of the island, as the rest is cut off by mountains, which is actually pretty accurate to real life, as the real life Hokkaido is covered in mountains. I'm glad they didn't include all of them, because this game includes enough mountain climbing as it is. So yeah, this is basically a fairy tale version of Japan. If we want something more grounded and realistic, play one of the Yakuza games. But that is realism with a massive asterisk, because those games do get a bit crazy. I prefer the setting and the story of Tsushima, but Yotei really did improve the gameplay, giving a lot more variety in weapons and enemies. When I first played Tsushima, I thought it was going to be an Assassin's Creed clone, and at first glance it does kind of look like this. It took me a while to get into, but eventually it got me and I was hooked. It's one of the most beautiful open world games out there. It's like you're playing through a painting. The story in both games is great, and it's just so stylish and cinematic. One thing I especially love is the minimal design of the game's head-up display. Instead of putting a pin in a map which you have to follow, it guides you using the wind, and occasionally forest creatures to help you home in to where you're heading. With a lot of open world games, the collectibles and side activities just feel like bulk and filler to make the game last a little bit longer. But with these games, it feels like everything you're doing is helping you progress further, increasing your health or giving you new skills. And if you're not leveling up, they are there to give you a moment to chill out and appreciate the world around you, whether that's through painting or creating a haiku. Seriously, how does this game make haikus fun?
Deep breaths released to the wind, a new beginning.
They're both stunning open world games I would highly recommend. Now on to Russia, the world's largest country. I already covered Russia in my video where I visited every country in Europe. But because I used a game set in Moscow, which is in the European part of the country, I decided to choose a new one that covered more of the country. And there's plenty out there to choose from, whether you're fighting alongside them as your allies in World War II, or fighting against them as enemies in the Cold War. Russia appears in more than its fair share of video games. If it's World War II, then you're probably in the city of Stalingrad, as developers in the early 2000s had an obsession with this city. And if it's the Cold War, then there's a high chance you're up in the mountains, it's snowing, and you're infiltrating some kind of large, concrete base. There's also a large number of games set in the country's capital city of Moscow, and that's where our story begins, in Metro Exodus. The Metro games are based on a series of novels, set in a post-nuked Moscow, where people now survive down in the metro tunnels. Fed up with this way of life, our hero Artyom, his wife, and a group of misfit soldiers steal what is probably the coolest and most ugliest train in all of gaming, and embark on an epic railroad trip across Russia, in search of a new home, free of radiation, mutants and raiders. So let's have a little look at some of the locations we visit. Our first stop is the Volga River. The part of the river we visit in game sits southeast of Moscow, and what we see in the game matches what you'll see in real life. This section of river is incredibly wide, and is flanked by marshland. The river has also flooded a lot of the surrounding area, and the Volga River is prone to flooding in springtime, which just happens to be the time of year we're visiting in game. So far very accurate. But the lifting bridge, which is the main focal point in this mission, is completely fictitious. There are some large metal truss rail bridges in this area, but none have a lifting mechanism. The only lift bridge I could find anywhere near here was in Astrakhan, and it's a lot smaller, and sits on one of the Volga's tributaries rather than the Volga River itself. Next up is Mount Yamantau, deep within Russia's Ural Mountains, and I can confirm that yes, this is what mountains look like. Then on to the Rin Desert. This part of the game actually takes place in Kazakhstan, but the desert does stretch into Russian territory as well. The general look of the desert is pretty accurate, although in real life there are a few more plants than we see in the game. But then again, nuking the entire planet probably would have done a few things to the climate. We can also find caves filled with natural gas, and a fuel depot of some kind. And when I checked the real world map, turns out there's a large oil refinery and depot in this exact area. Also, with all the boats we see that are left high and dry, gives me the impression that this level was heavily inspired by the real life Aral Sea, which you'll also find in Kazakhstan. This was once the world's third largest inland sea, but is now mostly dried up due to Soviet irrigation projects, which means you'll find plenty of abandoned ports and boats just sat in the middle of a desert. And the last level I want to talk about is the Taiga, which, judging by the scenery, probably takes place in the Burabay National Park, which sits close to the Russian-Kazakh border. This is a large area of green forested valleys, much like we see in the game, but the dam is completely made up. And all these creepy child statues are probably a reference to the Brahmali fountain in Stalingrad. So we've gone full circle, all the way back to Stalingrad. I really love the setting of the Metro trilogy. I think Metro Last Light is probably my favourite, but Exodus did do a good job of mixing things up a bit, by giving us some large open areas to explore. I love the design of all the weapons and equipment and how everything is just thrown together, but in a way it feels like it could work in real life. There's a few small elements of survival as well, as you often have to change your gas mask filters so you don't die of radiation poisoning, and you have to keep your torch fully charged so you don't end up alone in the dark. All these elements add tension to the darker and more scary parts of the game. It does have to be said though that Exodus is quite glitchy, and the voice acting isn't the best, but they're great games in a quite unique setting. Up next is India, the country with the world's highest population, so no surprises it appears in plenty of video games. Unfortunately, Western developers rarely paint the prettiest picture of India, as levels often take place in stereotypical, dirty, overcrowded, and slightly falling apart cities, rather than focusing on the more beautiful parts of the country, like the lower Himalayas, Thar Desert, ancient temples, or jungle. But luckily, Uncharted Lost Legacy exists. Nathan Drake, our protagonist from the previous games, has retired, and now lives out his days playing with toys in his man cave. Basically every millennial male's dream. And so his adventure boots have been filled by Chloe Fraser, a side character in a couple of the other games. and she's partnered up with Nadine Ross, one of the main enemies from Uncharted 4. They must work together as they shoot, climb, and puzzle their way through India, on the trail of an ancient artifact, the Tusk of Ganesh. Our game begins in the stereotypical, dirty, overcrowded, and slightly falling apart city. What, really, Uncharted? I thought we weren't doing that. Anyway, this city is even more falling apart than normal, due to a civil war. The city is never named, and we get a pretty good look at it from this rooftop, but the skyline doesn't match anything in real life. The only main landmark we see is the temple by the market, but it seems to draw inspiration from multiple temples, rather than a specific one, although it appears to be a little on the small side. Indian temples, especially in the middle of cities, tend to be a lot taller than this. We then head off to the Western Ghats, which is a massive mountain range that stretches across the western coast of India, but we're definitely down in the southern part of the mountain range, as that's where the jungle is, and this is also the region where the Hoysala Empire used to sit, as it's this ancient kingdom we'll be exploring in the game. Whilst adventuring around this region, we visit the ancient lost cities of Balor and Halabadu, but turns out they're not actually lost or ancient at all. They're just normal towns you can visit in India, but there are temples there, but obviously not quite as grand as we see in the game. This goes for the scenery in general. It looks absolutely gorgeous in this game, but as we often see in Uncharted, the world around us is oversaturated and greatly exaggerated. And I'm fine with that. It gives the game a sense of wonder, and like we're travelling around a true forgotten paradise that you'll only find in tales of fantasy. You'll find waterfalls in this region, but not like the crazy sizes we see here, and the temples and statues we pass through are very over the top. But they do draw design details from real life temples, but obviously on a far, far, far grander scale. But the thing I appreciate the most about this game is its use and representation of Hindu culture and myths. It's something you just don't see in video games. It plays a huge part in the story and the world building, and we see massive statues of the Hindu deities Shiva and Ganesh. So yeah, 0 points for realism, 10 points for style, and 12 points for gorgeousness. This entry in the Uncharted series is very short and sweet, but it's still bursting with the exploration and action of all the other Uncharted games. I think Chloe and Nadine are a great pairing, as they slowly learn to trust each other and work together to make it through the adventure alive. If you've not picked up and played this particular Uncharted, I would definitely recommend it. It only takes about a day to blast through the main story. We now cross the border and head into Pakistan. I was quite surprised to find how many of my games take place in Pakistan. I couldn't find any games that solely take place here, as it's normally just a destination for 1 or 2 missions, taking place across the Middle East, or even across the whole world. But again, it's not really painted in a very good light, and you normally go here to track down one of the world's most wanted. Hey, come on game developers, that only happened once. Pakistan has way more to offer to the world than that. In Ghost Recon Future Soldier, we head to Pakistan to track down a Russian arms dealer, one of the world's most wanted. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Specifically, we're going to the city of Peshawar, which sits in between the capital of Islamabad and the border with Afghanistan. There's a sniping section on rooftops, a gunfight on the crowded, traffic-filled streets, and then concluding with an on-rail shooting section and a helicopter flying through a dusty canyon. I was quite surprised of how well the level designers have depicted this city. We can't spot any of the city's main landmarks, but the minaret towers and domed buildings we see dotted around the level are definitely taking inspiration from the Mahabat Khan Mosque, specifically the white marble towers, which are octagon-shaped, topped with teardrop-shaped domes. The buildings we see down on the street are also pretty accurate, as many of the building frontages are highly ornate, with arched windows and highly detailed terraced balconies, which is all very typical of what you'll see on the real-life streets of Peshawar. We then head west out of the city, and again, just like real life, you'll find dusty hills and valleys, with not a lot of civilization, apart from a few windy tarmac roads. So yeah, good job Future Soldier! This is the first game I played in the Ghost Recon series, and I really enjoyed it. It's a nice mix of strategy and action. You lead a squad of 4 Special Force soldiers, and you can have them all sync up sniper shots to take down multiple enemies at once, which never gets old. Each level feels very varied and different as we make our way all over the world, and the near future tech feels quite grounded and never goes over the top. And I quite like the augmented reality text that pops up all over the place. It's a solid tactical shooter. Next up is China, another very popular destination for video games. This vast country has giant metropolitan cities, otherworldly landscapes, and a vast ancient history to choose from as a setting for a video game. Also in more recent years, China has been pitted as an adversary to the USA, because sometimes even Russia needs a day off. It also has the world's largest video game economy, which is ironic because the Chinese government really doesn't want their kids to play them. Not many games from Chinese developers make their way to the West. I don't own Black Myth Wukong, or any games from the massive Dynasty Warriors series. And many of my games that I thought were set in China were actually set in Hong Kong, which I've got down as a separate country in my list, but we'll be visiting there very shortly. I don't really have a game that's definitively set in China. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle has a brilliant and action-packed level that takes place in Shanghai, but is currently being bombed by the Japanese, so not the best representation. And Hitman 3 has a level that takes place in the city of Kongchung, which is a pretty good representation of a modern Chinese city. But I'm not the biggest fan of that level, so my choice for China, I think you're either going to love it or hate it. Crash Bandicoot Warped. Don't worry, I promise my choice for Hong Kong will be a lot more adult and gritty. The main reason I picked this game was a pure nostalgia hit. Crash Bandicoot 2 was one of the very first video games I owned, so these games and this marsupial means a huge amount to me. He's the first video game icon I ever played with. Look at those fingerless gloves and bright red sneakers, he's a badass. In this game, the evil Dr. Cortex has teamed up with an evil mask to enslave the Earth, but first they need to gather some powerful crystals that are scattered throughout time. It's up to you, dopey, sneaker-wearing Crash Bandicoot and its clever sister Coco, to go on a time travel adventure to gather the crystals before they do. In the levels Orient Express and Midnight Run, we play as Crash's sister Coco, as she rides on the back of a tiger cub along the Great Wall of China. That's still under construction, which means we're probably in the Ming Dynasty era, as this is where the most well-known sections of the wall were built, and we're probably on the section of the wall called Xingshangling, located in a mountainous area in the Hebei province, and it was built to defend China and Matt Damon from alien monsters. Oh wait, sorry, wrong Wikipedia page. It was built to defend from invasion from nomadic tribes, not aliens. So what is there to say? Well, it's a very cartoony version of the Great Wall, and overall it's a nice recreation. Tigers play an important role in Chinese myth and culture, and so do dragons, which we have to try and jump over as we make our way along the wall. And they have traditional Chinese dragon characteristics. Long serpent-like bodies, with the ability to fly despite not having wings. I'm also pleased to see that they're not breathing fire. Chinese dragons don't do that, as they're creatures of water, not fire. And yeah, dudes with bow staffs, pretty Chinese, but the staffs are actually called guns, which make things a little bit confusing, but this is a weapon they would use in the Ming Dynasty. The wall is covered in bamboo scaffolding, which is something that's still used today, and in case you're wondering, all the banners in Chinese writing literally just say Great Wall. Crash Bandicoot Warped is the third game in the original trilogy, and it's probably the easiest of the three. Due to its time-travelling storyline, there's a large variation in the level design. There's your normal on-foot platforming, but we also get to ride tigers, speedboats and motorcycles. It's not my favourite Crash Bandicoot game, but it's still great for a nostalgic playthrough. And the remasters, which obviously I'm using here, look absolutely fantastic, giving the original trilogy a well-deserved modern makeover. Okay, Hong Kong. Technically not an independent country, it's a special administrative region, which basically means it has its own government and legal system. And it was on the Wikipedia list of countries, so here it is in this video. It's a very popular choice for games set in China. I think this is because part of it is an island, which will obviously give you a very clear border when designing a game set here. And it's a place a lot of people have heard of. It's very easy to pronounce in English. I'm sure that's the only reason why Britain colonised it, and had absolutely nothing to do with opium. Anyway, quickly moving on. Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown has an amazing version of Hong Kong. It's basically a one-to-one recreation with a few minor changes. But that game's quite mediocre. And I promised you something a bit more adult and gritty, so let's go for the amazing Sleeping Dogs. You play undercover cop Wei Shen, attempting to bring down a triad organised crime gang from the inside, but whilst working alongside them taking down other gangs, he ends up forming a strong relationship with those around him, a tale as old as The Fast and the Furious, or Point Break, or Miss Congeniality. And he does all the normal, and definitely legal, things an undercover cop does, like sadistically murder hundreds of people, go on a date with two-time Best Actress Oscar winner Emma Stone, yes that is really her, and help out a cannibalistic grandma. The overall layout of Hong Kong in the game isn't very accurate. It's been shrunk down massively, obviously for gameplay reasons. There are a few areas of green space in between the more urban environments, but there should be way more, especially around the south part of the island. But we do get to find plenty of Hong Kong landmarks dotted around the map, including the old council building, Chinese Bank Tower, and the convention centre on the waterfront. And all these Hong Kong landmarks are pretty decent recreations. We can even find the iconic Hong Kong tramway, with fully animated double-decker trolleys. One thing Sleeping Dogs does a great job at is recreating the atmosphere of Hong Kong. If you get into the alleyways and markets, they're bursting with life. There are street performers and food vendors, and people just going about their daily lives. So, geographically not very accurate, but in terms of creating day-to-day life in Hong Kong, it does a pretty good job. This is an excellent open world game. The story is great, and the gameplay is really fun. And the martial arts style of fighting, which is a real mix of Kung Fu, Taekwondo and, well, basically every Asian fight style you could think of, really makes the game stand out from the typical shooting everyone in the face kind of open world game. This is also combined with some brutal finishes. I dread to think how much paperwork would be involved to try and explain back at the station why you had to impale someone on a pallet of swordfish heads. It can be a little over the top, and it may be a little bit rough around the edges, but it's a massive shame we didn't get a sequel. Well, seeing how we did Hong Kong, that means we have to do Macau, China's other special administrative region. Famous for its casinos and gambling, it's often called Las Vegas of the East, or Monte Carlo of the Orient. There's a lot less games set here compared to Hong Kong, but I found it in 2 of the games I own. You can play it as a street circuit in Ride 4, and also in Project Gotham Racing 4. And because that game has way more circuits, bikes and cars, and is way more fun, that's the one I'm going to be looking at. In terms of accuracy, this is by far the most accurate recreation of a real world place we've seen so far. The Gotham Racing level designers flew out to multiple cities across the world. They took a ton of photos and videos and did a whole bunch of research, so they could recreate these locations on a 1-to-1 scale, and use real life road layouts to create some fun and interesting racetracks. If you drive around a racetrack in the game, you can then go onto a map of the real world, and draw out the exact circuit you take. It's very cool and very clever, and pretty much every building has been recreated in great detail, including the landmarks. But because this game came out in 2007, obviously all the new ones built over the past 2 decades are missing. So if you want to see the Grand Lisboa Casino, you'll have to go into Ride 4. This game sits somewhere in the middle in between a driving simulator and an arcade racing game, and as a result it's a lot of fun, but also quite challenging. What makes it stand out from other racing games out there is the kudos point system. Sure, you can get points in the traditional way, by scoring as high up a leaderboard as possible, but you're also awarded bonus points for doing things like power sliding, catching air, or just driving well and not crashing into things. As a geography nerd, I really appreciate the time and effort they put into accurately recreating all these cities. One country that appears in a ton of video games, despite being relatively small, is the United Arab Emirates. And there's one city in particular that game developers all seem to flock to: Dubai. The UAE became extremely wealthy due to its natural oil reserves, but thinking ahead into the future, they knew oil wouldn't last forever, and they decided to turn this small town in the middle of the desert into a playground for the world's rich and famous, building some absolutely crazy and over-the-top projects, like the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest skyscraper, and the artificial palm-shaped islands. The game I've gone for is what I think is one of the most underrated games out there: Spec Ops: The Line. The version of Dubai we see in the game has been ravaged by sandstorms, and huge parts of the city are now completely buried under the dunes. We lead a small squad of soldiers on a reconnaissance mission to track down a rogue US military unit, but things soon descend into chaos and violence, and our own morals and sanity is tested as we play through the game. As we make our way around the destroyed Dubai, we spot many of its famous landmarks. We can see the Burj Al Arab, and of course the Burj Khalifa, which looks absolutely enormous in this game. If anything, it's too tall. Both these buildings have been changed slightly compared to their real life counterparts, possibly due to trademark laws on newer buildings. We also see a few other famous locations, like the Marina District and the monorail system, which we won't be taking today due to sand on the line. And we can even see one of the palms from up on the rooftops. The layout of Dubai in this game is an absolute mess though. In terms of landmarks, Dubai is really split into 2 places: downtown with the Burj Khalifa, and the Marina District where you'll find the palms, with the Burj Al Arab in the middle. We can see the ocean and the Burj Al Arab off to our left, but the buildings in front of us look a lot like the marina, which should be behind us at this point. Basically, they've taken all the landmarks and shoved them directly into downtown, including the palms, which should also be behind us at this point. Also, as we play through the game, many of the landmarks I've already mentioned tend to move around the place, and don't seem to stay in the same location. But then again, we are going crazy in this game, so maybe it's on purpose. Also, the levels at which the buildings are buried in sand also seems very inconsistent. One moment the skyscrapers are completely free of sand, the next they're a good 10 or 20 stories deep, creating a massive canyon in the sand. At a glance, Spec Ops: The Line is your typical 2010s cover shooter, and for the first few chapters of the game this is exactly what it feels like. But things quickly take a dark turn. You're committing war crimes left, right and centre, and you don't just shrug them off, they affect you deeply. Your character shows signs of PTSD and starts hallucinating, and this really makes it stand out from other games out there. And the setting is incredibly unique, and also creates some gameplay opportunities. Frag grenades now kick up a plume of sand, which can provide cover to help you advance. You can shoot out windows to dump a ton of sand on people. Sandstorms also frequently blow in. This game really is a unique and interesting hidden gem. We stay in the Arabian Peninsula and head to Saudi Arabia. Much like the UAE, it's a country of giant deserts and large oil reserves, so it fits nicely into a larger story of politics or espionage. Or maybe you just want to set your game in a bloody big desert. Like with the 2022 off-road racer Dakar Desert Rally. This game's map is absolutely gigantic and covers most of Saudi Arabia. The real-life Dakar Rally is often called the world's most difficult racing event, and each year is currently being held in Saudi Arabia. They've done a great job at recreating the Arabian wilderness in this game, from its mazes of towering escarpments of rock to endless sandy dunes that stretch for miles. It matches what you'd see if you were unfortunate enough to get lost in the middle of the desert. And unlike other video game maps of a similar size, I don't think this has been procedurally generated. It feels like someone has actually taken the time to craft the world around us, as there is plenty of unique things to find out there in the desert. Like quarries, industrial areas, abandoned villages, oases, crashed aeroplanes, and hulking shipwrecks along the coastline. And we could also find a couple of real-life landmarks, like the monolithic tomb, Qasr al-Farid, and the ancient rock carvings at Hagra. For obvious reasons, the devs couldn't be bothered to make explorable cities, but we can drive on their outskirts, and I was able to spot more landmarks. If we drive past Jeddah, for example, we can see its port lighthouse, and other skyscrapers. It's a great map, and a great racing game. What I like the most is you can play it anywhere you want. If you want to go for the full Dakar experience, driving against the clock, trying to reach waypoints whilst following a roadbook, you can do that. Or if you're more of a filthy casual like me, you can play what I like to call Motorstorm mode, racing against other vehicles in a massive free-for-all. The weather in this game is also a sight to behold, especially the towering sandstorms. Just look how epic this looks. Oh, what a day! What a lovely day! Yeah, big fan of this game. Another great shout out for a game set in Saudi Arabia would have been Uncharted 3. It has a very memorable mission here, starting off with a plane crash. It then has you wandering around the desert completely lost. But I couldn't use Uncharted 3 because I needed it for our next country, Syria. This country sits in the far western side of the Middle East, and is a rare choice as a setting for a video game. In Uncharted 3, we're trying to find the lost city of Ubar, which sits somewhere in the middle of the Rub al Khali Desert in Saudi Arabia. But first we need to take a trip to Syria, to look for clues and narrow down this lost city's exact location. The ruins we visit in game are actually based on a real life location, the ancient medieval citadel in Aleppo. At first glance it's a pretty good recreation. They got the gatehouse with a narrow bridge leading up to the main entrance of the citadel, and its towering walls that run around its perimeter. But when we head inside, it doesn't really resemble the real life citadel at all. In reality it's a lot more open than this. I'm pretty sure it's not filled with vast catacombs, full of an undiscovered species of giant venomous spider. Also, the citadel sits in the middle of Aleppo, a city of about 2.3 million people. But in the game it looks like we're just in the middle of a valley with a few large villages dotted around the place. This is our second Uncharted game on this list, so you've probably already figured out I'm a massive fan of the series. This one just might be my favourite, but it really depends what day of the week you're asking me. It certainly has some of the franchise's most iconic moments, but the overall story isn't quite as captivating as Uncharted 4 or 2. But still, it has everything you could want from an action-adventure game. Well, we've made a good start, but there's still a long way to go. The next 3 countries we visit also appear in lots of video games, but unfortunately not for a very good reason: war. So with that in mind, let's head to Vietnam. After a decade of games set in World War II in the early 2000s, players and developers grew stale of the setting, so a new conflict was needed. So why not the war in Vietnam? This lasted from 1955 till 1975, and saw fighting in Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos. The Call of Duty Black Ops series particularly had a fascination with this war, along with many games out there. But after that introduction, I'm not actually going to pick a Vietnam War game to represent Vietnam. Not only that, but it's also an open world game, Smuggler's Run 2. The premise of this game is simple. You drive a vehicle, you collect goods, don't crash, don't get arrested, deliver the goods. That's basically it. In the game we visit Russia and Vietnam. It may be a very basic recreation of the country, but it's undoubtedly Vietnam. Below the countryside is wide open valleys, flanked by steep forest covered slopes. The map also includes rice fields, which is a common sight in the Vietnamese countryside. They definitely could have done more with these though, as in some parts of the countries they formed very dramatic terraces. But then again we do need to drive over them, Bouncing down rice paddies like a massive staircase would have been a lot of fun, but going back up again, not so much. They definitely could have done more with the coastline, as the country has some of the most gorgeous coastline in the whole world, such as Ha Long Bay, but here it's just very boring and dull. We can find a few stilted huts constructed from wood and reeds, and even a small settlement, which are both pretty accurate for the Vietnamese building style in its rural location. We can even find an ancient temple, and its basic shape is quite accurate to ruins you'll find in the region, but the same definitely can't be said for the game's elephant physics. The Smuggler's Run games are very simple, but also a lot of fun as you tear across an open space, trying not to lose control or get rammed into a million pieces. It's a shame we only got 2 games in this franchise, but its legacy definitely lives on in Grand Theft Auto, as you can find a few missions that are almost certainly inspired by this old Rockstar franchise. Our next country is Afghanistan. At the end of the 2000s, not only did we see a rise of games set in the Vietnam War, more modern conflicts started to become a common setting. And of course, game developers would take inspiration from the current news at the time, which was the ongoing war in Afghanistan. And as a result, you'll find many games set in this country, including Medal of Honor, the 2010 reboot. I've chosen this one because I think it's a far more honest depiction of the war in Afghanistan and the country itself. During the campaign we played multiple characters, a Special Forces operative, a Marine, and a gunner in an Apache helicopter. This isn't a historical retelling of exactly what happened in the war, but it definitely takes inspiration from real life battles and encounters. Obviously this conflict is terrible and should never have happened, like, well, all wars throughout history, but it's very easy to overlook the dramatic and sometimes beautiful landscapes that happen around it. The dusty mountains and valleys we see in the game are very realistic. When we picture Afghanistan, we often think of a hot, dry, dusty place, but the mountainous regions, where a lot of the fighting took place, see significant snowfall, and we see plenty of it in the game. And we get a particularly nice view of the mountains and landscape in the helicopter mission. It looks stunning. The villages and farmland and buildings we fly over are also very accurate to what you'll see in real life. They obviously had a lot of news footage at the time to work with to recreate a very accurate looking Afghanistan. This is a very grounded and gritty first person shooter, and full of some iconic moments, including the action-packed Apache gunner mission. Another very memorable one is when you get completely overwhelmed by enemy forces, when you're hiding in an abandoned building that's slowly being blown up around you. I also like the fact that this game shows you working alongside the people of Afghanistan, and not just against them. It's a detail that often gets overlooked in other military games out there. I'm not saying it's 100% accurate with its depiction of this brutal conflict, but it gets pretty damn close. Around the same time as the war in Afghanistan, there was also conflict in Iraq, looking for non-existent WMDs. Not only that, but there was also the Gulf War in the early 90s, that is also used as a backdrop for video games, but not quite as frequent. But let's throw a curveball here, and travel back to ancient times, with Assassin's Creed Mirage. In this Assassin's Creed game, you play a historical character in a historical setting, trying to retrieve a powerful artifact of a long-lost civilization, before the evil Templars do. So basically the plot of every single Assassin's Creed game ever made. Hang on. Let me just copy and paste that voice line for later. In this game we feel the stabby swordy assassination boots of Basim, as he makes his way around Baghdad, during the Islamic Golden Age. And my god does this city look absolutely gorgeous. This is almost certainly the most detailed game set in the Middle East out there. It's clear the level designers did an absolute ton of research to get all the small details historically accurate as possible. The giant round wall that encircles the centre of the city looks amazing, and almost like something out of myth, but this did genuinely exist. Unfortunately there's no signs of it anymore. In fact, there's only a small handful of landmarks in this game you can still find in our modern world today, including this caravanserai, but admittedly it's over the border in Iran, not Iraq. This old prison, which is almost identical to a real-life fortress in Kabbalah. And most surprising of all, Dokuri Galzu, the remains of an ancient ruin that's over 3,000 years old. This game was a much-needed return to the roots of Assassin's Creed. The level designs got way too big, with way too much stuff to do, and they streamlined the experience back to one large city, with a smaller story. It's a great game just for exploring, and learning about Middle Eastern culture and history. I have gone off this franchise in recent years, but I enjoyed this one. It's not the best Assassin's Creed game, but it's also certainly not the worst. Right, after all this talk of war in the previous entries, I fancy a holiday. Let's go to the Maldives. an archipelago in the Indian Ocean, and a popular location for honeymoons. But that certainly isn't the reason why Agent 47 is there in Hitman 2. In the mission Last Resort, you're here to take down the 3 owners of an evil tech corporation. For a lot of people, this is what paradise looks like. Tropical islands covered in palm trees, with clear azure blue water teeming with colourful fish, and perfect white sandy beaches. There are resorts just like this all over the Maldives, often with private rooms built onto piers stretching out into the ocean, with luxurious restaurants, bars and gyms. Anything you could ever want for the perfect relaxing getaway, and they've all been beautifully recreated in this level. Tourism is now the biggest sector in the Maldives economy. In the real world there are a few towns and fishing villages on some of the islands, but this is basically exactly what people picture when they think of the Maldives. This map was a DLC, and definitely worth a playthrough. It may be smaller with less going on than some of the maps that came with the base game, but it sure is a gorgeous setting, and definitely worthy of an explore. Speaking of Hitman 2, our next game is Hitman 2 2, but we go to the PlayStation 2 in 2002 for Hitman 2. I'm very confused. Next country is Malaysia, but it's the original Hitman 2, not the new one. It's completely different. In this game we go to the iconic Petronas Towers in the Malaysian capital city of Kuala Lumpur. First we need to head down into the basement to take out a hacker. Then after a long elevator ride, we head across the sky bridge, and then into one of the tower's apartments to take out the hacker's twin brother. Just try not to think too hard about where these scantily clad bodyguards are concealing their handguns. These towers were once the tallest skyscrapers in the world, and the exterior of them looks pretty good. The level designers have also done a really good job with the lobby. It's almost perfect, with the light orange paneling on the walls behind the desk, and the round silver pillars, even the pointy light fixtures. But the floor texture is wrong, and its scale has been shrunk down, but I really just nitpicking at this point. We then head across onto the sky bridge. Unfortunately, if we look out at the view, we don't see any landmarks of Kuala Lumpur. In fact, we don't see much of anything, and if you stare at the buildings below for too long, they start to lack any geometric sense. Another nice detail I like in this level is the fact that the security guards will occasionally speak little phrases in Malay, Malaysia's official language. It's a nice touch. It's a language you never hear in video games. Hitman 2 is where this series started to find its feet. The levels became more open, with more variety and ways to take down your targets. It's still not quite as varied or as creative as the games that came after it, but it's still a fun challenge to play through. Sticking with holiday destinations, another popular choice for the backdrop of video games is Thailand. I was originally going to use the game's Stuntman for this one, but after replaying it, I couldn't believe how dull and dreary Bangkok looked. It's so grey. It needs more colour, just like the real life city. Well, buckle up for Burnout 3 Takedown. That's much better, much more colourful. This arcade racer is all about driving fast and smashing up your opponents, while trying not to become a twisted wreck of metal yourself. There are racetracks in America, Europe, and the Far East, which is where we're heading. The Asian tracks draw inspiration from multiple countries. Dockside is obviously based on Hong Kong, judging by the skyline and the ferries we see, and all the signs feature Chinese writing. But Golden City is definitely based on Bangkok. The first sign is, well, the signs. They're all written in Thai script. The next big giveaway is the tuk-tuks that you see driving around the streets, a true icon of Thailand. And we can also see a couple of Bangkoki landmarks, including a version of the Raman the 8th Bridge. I'm assuming that's a Roman numeral, and it's not pronounced Rama V. And across the river we can see the, oh god, the, Wataroon, Rach Awara Ram Rach Awa Ramahawahan, Wataroon, Bangkok's famous large round temple. It does a good job at recreating the feel of the city, with all the large bright colourful signs, market stalls and overpasses. There's another track called Island Paradise, which gets most of its inspiration from the coast and beaches of Vietnam, but some of the more picturesque parts of the Thailand coastline also look like this, with stunning limestone rock formations and golden sand beaches. There's also a giant gold Buddha on the island, not too dissimilar to the one you'll find in Bangkok. The Burnout series is one of the true classic arcade racing games out there. It's still so much fun. The sense of speed and the chaos of the crashes means you'll be playing with a massive smile on your face. And the soundtrack is absolutely banging. I blame this franchise for my taste in music, as it was a huge inspiration for what I listened to when I was younger. I think this is the best game in the franchise, as it bridges the gap perfectly between the game's roots of you driving fast and dodging traffic, and before it went completely over the top, focusing more on crazy crashes and explosions. It's such a shame this franchise got killed off. but the graphics look great and still hold up today, so there's no excuse to jump in and start racing. Another game I could have chosen for Thailand is the James Bond game Bloodstone. This has a very memorable action sequence, where you chase a massive dump truck through the streets of Bangkok, where it absolutely wrecks the place. James Bond games have missions all over the world, so I looked at my collection to see if this franchise could deliver me any rare Asian countries. And they delivered me one of the rare stands. Tajikistan to be exact. Only a small handful of games are set here, but one of them happens to be James Bond 007, Everything or Nothing. This is the first country you visit in the game, and it serves as the tutorial level, which is useful because I completely forgot I could take cover in this game. This Indiana Jones looking villain is buying a Russian suitcase nuke from this stereotypical James Bond looking villain. But don't worry about it too much because it never shows up in the game ever again. The only part of Tajikistan we see in the game is this large open palace base thing. It sits in the Pamir Mountains, which is a real life mountain range you'll find in the country, but I couldn't find anything out there in the real world that matches this building. I looked at palaces, forts, even tried a reverse image search. Nothing. The architecture looks like it's been inspired by Japan or the Far East, but really, from the images I did see, Tajikistan architecture draws more parallels to the Middle East. So yeah, bit of a dead end with this one unfortunately. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments section in case I've missed something. Everything or Nothing has to be one of the best James Bond games out there. It ticks all the boxes, with crazy gadgets, thrilling car chases, beautiful women, and action-packed set pieces. Definitely worth a playthrough if you're a fan of the old Jimmy B. Seeing how we're in the neighbourhood, let's try and tick off the rest of the stands. Starting with Kazakhstan, with a game I didn't even know was set there. Atomic Heart. This game takes place in a retro-futuristic version in the USSR, back when the Soviet Union covered multiple countries that are now independent. After a long opening sequence, set in a flying communist utopia, we head down to ground level, to a research facility in the Kazakh SSR, which is now modern-day Kazakhstan. In this game, all the robots used as servants, utility or military purposes have all gone rogue and are massacring everyone. It's up to you, a Soviet special agent, to find out what's caused all the clankers to go mad and stop the chaos. Right, unless Kazakhstan is very sneaky and good at hiding futuristic megastructures, flying cities isn't a very Kazakhstani thing. The architecture we see in the city, as well as the base down below, is very much based on that classic Soviet brutalist style. There are a few buildings around Kazakhstan like this, from back when they were under Soviet control, but most Kazakh architecture draws more inspiration from the Middle East. As we fly down towards the facility, we get a great look at the countryside. We are flying over Lake Lazur, which I looked up and it doesn't exist, not in Kazakhstan or anywhere, but I'd say this region almost certainly draws its inspiration from the real-life Khalsay Lakes National Park, which sits in the southeastern corner of the country, on the border with Kyrgyzstan, and it looks very gorgeous and very spectacular, with evergreen-covered mountains and large deep blue lakes. Atomic Heart is a mixed bag of a game. It clearly draws inspiration from Bioshock, which it makes very clear. I absolutely love the design of the world the developers created for this game, the opening sequence especially. It felt like something genuinely new and interesting to go and explore. I love the design of the robots, and the gameplay is also pretty fun, with a variety of weapons and abilities, and it has some truly awesome boss fights as well. But there's also a lot of things I don't like about this game. The main protagonist we play is just constantly talking all the time, and I find him really annoying, and also the plot is really hard to follow. Sometimes I'll be watching a cutscene and I'll have absolutely no idea what on earth I'm looking at. I think this ties into the fact that the characters are always talking, so I don't know what is important that I need to listen to and what's just meaningless background information. So the game's fun, but annoying, and sometimes confusing. The next stand is Kyrgyzstan, another rare location for video games. But luckily for us, in Stuntman Ignition, one director has chosen to shoot a movie there. Here we play a stuntman, and we have to perform a series of action sequences, whilst following directions from a, well, director. Ramp off this, smash that, drive close to this explosion, that sort of thing. The movie Strike Force Omega is being filmed on location in the desert of Kyrgyzstan. It's part Mad Max, part A-Team, and part Rambo. It's clearly going for the 1980s action vibe. I honestly assumed that the landscape depicted in the game wouldn't be very accurate, as it looks very much like deserts in part of America, specifically some of the canyons in Colorado, with sheer red rock faces. Turns out Kyrgyzstan is a land of very diverse landscapes. There are a few flat sandy deserts, but then there's also the Kyrgyzstan Badlands. Anything called Badlands already sounds badass as hell. Now the landscape consists of more pointed eroded peaks rather than sheer rock faces, but then I found an area called Canyon of Forgotten Rivers, Beautiful name, very poetic. And you know what? The landscape isn't a million miles away. We do see sheer red rock cliff faces. A lot of the buildings we see as we play through the various action set pieces are clearly oil and gas refineries or storage. Kazakhstan does have a small oil industry, but they're not in the Canyon of Forgotten Rivers. The original Stuntman is one of my favourite PlayStation 2 games. It was all about controlling the vehicle with skill and precision, hitting your marks perfectly, and then lining up for the next stunt, all within the time limit. And then Stuntman Ignition came along and gave the franchise ADHD. It's just constantly throwing stuff at you. It's all about trying to chain combos together, wanting you to drive close to things or break stuff, as well as the main directions and stunts. It also made that original game really special and fun to play. It's still kind of fun, but for me personally it was a massive step down from the original. Up next is Uzbekistan, another difficult one to find. I've had to dip into my Call of Duty collection for this one, with Call of Duty Cold War. In the optional side mission Red Circus, we head to a Soviet base in the mountains of Uzbekistan to take down 3 spies. Shockingly for a Call of Duty game, you actually need to use your brain for this one, following clues to identify the 3 targets and take them down. The surroundings we find ourselves in is very generic, to be honest. There are plenty of mountain ranges in the north of Uzbekistan, and I see significant snowfall in the winter. You can even find ski resorts up there. But there's nothing in this mission that is specifically Uzbek. It could literally be any generic mountain base in the USSR. Call of Duty Cold War has one of the more interesting Call of Duty campaigns in recent years. It took a few risks, tried a few different things, which I appreciate. Rather than just running around and shooting everyone, a couple of times you have to put the guns away and go into cover, sneaking around to meet up with informants or gather intel. It has a plot twist at the end, similar to that of Bioshock, and even a sequence that feels like you're playing the Stanley Parable, which is something I never thought I'd see coming from a Call of Duty game. There's only one Stan left standing, Turkmenistan. Unfortunately, I don't own any games that take place here, so we'll put a pin in this one and come back to it later. For now then, let's head to Turkiye. The only country in Asia I've actually visited myself. Like Russia, this country also featured in my European video, and I was torn between Driver 3 and Assassin's Creed Revelation. For that video, I chose Driver 3, so let's do a quick rundown of AC Revelations. In this Assassin's Creed game, you play a historical character in a historical setting, trying to retrieve a powerful artifact of a long-lost civilization before the evil Templars do. So basically the plot of every single Assassin's Creed game ever made. This rounds off the Ezio trilogy of games, and also returns to the story of Altair in the very first Assassin's Creed game. Most of the game takes place in Constantinople, the old-timey name for Istanbul, and they're doing a decent job at recreating some of the most well-known landmarks there. The Galata Tower dominates the southern part of the map, and across the Bosphorus River we can find the Hagia Sophia and Topkapi Palace. Obviously in the Ottoman Empire they weren't driving around in flashy sports cars, so we have to walk or zip line our way around the city, which means for gameplay purposes it's been shrunk down massively, including the landmarks themselves. Entire neighbourhoods are just completely missing. The streets do feel nice and crowded, and they have a good atmosphere. This game isn't quite as historically accurate as some of the more later games, due to its rushed development cycle. This game does a good job at wrapping up the Ezio and Altair story in Assassin's Creed. It tried out a few new things as well, that never returned in the franchise, like bomb crafting, and most strangely of all, tower defense. This definitely doesn't belong anywhere near an Assassin's Creed game. It probably is the weakest of the Ezio trilogy, but Constantinople sure does make an interesting backdrop. We now head across the other side of Asia to South Korea. I thought this one was going to be easy, and that I'd have a bunch of games to choose from, but unfortunately I've had to dip back into Call of Duty again, this time with Advanced Warfare. The opening mission of this game has us dropping into Seoul, Halo ODST or Helldiver style. We're here to help the South Koreans fight back an invasion from the north. It's a very intense battle, and the stress of it all clearly has an effect on the player character, as he loses a significant amount of weight by the end of the mission. When looking out across the skyline, we see a bunch of generic skyscrapers. In all fairness, Seoul does consist of mostly just generic skyscrapers, but you would have thought we'd have at least seen a couple of real-world landmarks, like the Seoul Tower, Jamsil World Tower. It doesn't get much better when we reach ground level. Sure, they've stuck a bunch of Korean signage over everything, and there's large LED screens, which makes the area look like Gangnam Square. But swap those signs out for English or Japanese text, and we could literally be anywhere. Later in the mission we head through Chinatown. Seoul does have a Chinatown, but it looks nothing like this. And we also go through the metro. Well, at least they got the train colour right. And the metro map is also pretty accurate. I am a bit disappointed that I had to pick this game, so if any South Koreans out there have a better and more accurate pick, please let me know down in the comments. And maybe I'll change it for when I cut this series together into one massive video where I visit the whole world. When this game first came out, I wasn't a huge fan, but after replaying it to gather footage for this video, I had a good time. It's all about crazy exosuits that give you the abilities to do massive jumps, wall run, as well as many other abilities. That gives the gameplay variety and keep things interesting, and we do get to view a few interesting locations in this near future world created for the game. We now cross the demilitarized zone as we enter North Korea. One game instantly came to mind when creating this list. Mercenaries, Playground of Destruction. In this game you play one of 3 mercenaries as you make your way around a large open map, blowing things up and killing or capturing high-ranking North Koreans and military leaders trying to complete the deck of cards. It's up to you to choose which faction you want to help out. Will it be the Americans, Chinese, Mafia, or South Koreans? But be careful, because helping one may annoy the other. The North Korea depicted in the game is a very suppressive place, with dull grey buildings and dull grey mountains, and it's always cloudy or snowing. Obviously I've not been to North Korea, but surely the sun comes out every once in a while there. In terms of the terrain, yeah, North Korea is quite hilly I suppose, but there really isn't a huge amount of variation in the landscape at all in this game. But we can find a few real world landmarks. There's the Arch of Triumph and the Arch of Reunification, this circular ice rink, and the infamous Ryugyong Hotel, which we actually have to blow up in the game. But the strange thing is, in the real world, you'll find all these landmarks in the NK capital of Pyongyang, but in this game they're dotted all over the map. And rather than one large central city, Pyongyang has been divided into a series of towns. The layout of the map doesn't resemble North Korea at all, to be honest. It's all over the place. This is quite a fun game, and being able to blow up absolutely everything on the map, including the buildings, never gets old. The sequel Mercenaries 2 World in Flames steps things up a notch, with a more humorous tone, crazy vehicles, and even bigger explosions, so I definitely rate that game above this one. One country I should have really covered earlier in the video is Nepal. Sorry, I forgot. That's because it's a very popular choice as a setting for video games, mainly because of the Himalayas, the world's highest mountain range. On the Nepalese-Chinese border you'll find Mount Everest, the highest point above sea level, so why not set a video game in the roof of the world? Far Cry 4 definitely deserves an honourable mention here, with its fictional country of Kyrat clearly being based on Nepal, with its high mountains and temples. But for me, personally, there really could only be one choice for this one: Uncharted 2. Nathan Drake is on the trail yet again of another lost city, this time Shambhala, and the legendary Chintamani Stone. All the clues point to Shambhala being somewhere in Nepal. First of all we head to a war-torn city that's never named but is definitely based on the Nepalese capital of Kathmandu. Unfortunately the city has seen better days, and turns out this is actually based on real life events, as the Maoist insurgency was a conflict that took place in Nepal between 1996 and 2006. At a quick glance you can tell the level designers drew inspiration from Kathmandu when designing the city. I was able to find this exact building when quickly looking at photos of this city. We get a great view from on top of a tall hotel, where we can look down on most of the city, where things start to become a bit inaccurate. Kathmandu is surrounded by mountains, but there's no giant lake, and I couldn't spot any rice terraces. We can also see a ton of domes and spires of various Buddhist temples. None of them are an exact match for any real life temples, but they definitely draw inspiration from places like Swayambho Mahachachya, Buddha Stupa, and Patan Durbar Square. Later on when we leave the city and head into the Himalayas, the other temples we find ourselves in also draw inspiration from these 3, although often on a much grander scale, filled with Buddhist iconography, including prayer wheels and prayer flags. So many prayer flags all over the place. We go on an epic train ride into the mountains, and the scenery around us looks amazing, but as Uncharted tends to do, it's very exaggerated and over the top. But my favourite place we get to explore in the game is an isolated village, way up in the mountains. Here you can take a chilled out stroll, say hello to villagers, and smell some yak bumholes.
Why did I do that?
This isn't a specific village, but draws inspiration from the rural villages way up in the mountains, built out of large bare stones and wooden frames, with the wooden detailing often painted in bright colours. So a lovely quaint little recreation. Uncharted 2 is a true masterpiece. Out of all the Uncharted games, I think it has the best balance between story, action and gameplay. The train level is definitely one of the most memorable and iconic in all of video games, and lives rent-free in the minds of all those who've played it. Definitely one of the best action-adventure games you'll ever play. Right, we're about halfway through. If you're enjoying the video so far, why not consider subscribing? I have a few series on my channel looking at geography and gaming that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Also like, comment, do all that good stuff. Thanks, I'd really appreciate that. Back to the world tour. Let's head back to the Middle East and see if we can quickly finish off this region. Starting with Iran. There are plenty of games out there set in modern day Iran, but rather than go for another military action game, I decided to head back in time to the Prince of Persia. In this game we play the titular nameless prince, who after a skirmish in India, comes across a magical dagger. This combined with an hourglass full of the sands of time, gives us the ability to rewind time for a short period. Which is very helpful, because it turns out the sands are cursed, and after they release, they turn almost everyone except you into sand zombies, which means you're going to do a lot of stabbing, parkouring over bottomless pits, and dodging numerous traps. So the ability to rewind time couldn't have come at a more convenient moment. The game never specifically says where we are, and takes place in what is said to be the heart of the Persian Empire, which stretched over numerous countries, but if we're in the Empire's heart, we must be in the middle. So it has to be Persia itself, which is now called Iran, so it's safe to say we are technically in Iran. We get a good look at the palace where this game takes place in an opening cutscene, and it's surrounded by sand, sitting on a large rocky outcrop. Definitely looks like the Iranian desert to me. Most of the game then takes place inside the palace's interior, and it takes a lot of design cues from Persian rugs and Persian tiles. Everything is ornate with highly decorative patterns, and even though it's complete fantasy, it feels very Iranian. We get a few glimpses at the exterior as we make our way through the game, and the architecture you see is very over the top. What I like to call Aladdin-esque, but the teardrop-shaped archways, minaret towers, and large pointed domes are all characteristics which are very typical of ancient Persian mosques and palaces. This game is a true classic, and giving you the ability to rewind time for a short period is an ingenious idea, and blends the gameplay and story perfectly. It's way better than just giving the prince a set number of lives and a few conveniently placed checkpoints. The parkour may now feel a little bit clunky, but it's still very satisfying when you get the timing just right to pull off the perfect jump over a dangerous gap. And if you're wondering what happened to the Prince of Persia, well, he left a life of royalty behind and became a racing car driver in the Forza Horizon series. That's the only explanation I have for the ability to rewind in that game. That's my headcanon and I'm sticking to it. The next stop is Israel. And what you might be thinking is the original Assassin's Creed is an obvious choice with its depiction of Jerusalem. But no, instead I've gone for World War Z. This zombie game is set in the same world as the 2013 Brad Pitt movie, which dared to ask, what if zombies, but too many zombies? There are 3 levels that take place in Israel. First we're in Jerusalem trying to save a doctor, and the other 2 see us heading out of the city to a power plant and then a military base, to turn on an orbital strike weapon. The version of Jerusalem we see in the game is a little confused. We start off next to the large concrete border wall that divides Israel and Palestine, but in the centre of Jerusalem is the ancient stone walls of the old city that marks the boundary, not a modern concrete one, but maybe they built this after the zombie apocalypse. We start off in a very generic Middle Eastern looking street, and later in the mission we head into more historic looking buildings, even though the old city sits on the Palestinian side of the border. One interesting detail are these sarcophagi, which are real things you'll find in the Museum of Israel, but that museum looks way more modern than this one. We then leave the city for the Ra base, which means thunder in Hebrew, which is a nice detail. This base is entirely fictional, but the countryside we see around us definitely matches that of Israel, specifically the southeastern part of the country. That's a little bit more arid, but you'll still find plenty of shrubs and palm trees. A nice detail we see as we make our way is all the signage is written in the Hebrew alphabet, so we're constantly being reminded that we're in Israel. This game is very impressive on a technical level. The amount of zombies this game throws at you is insane. Why is there no lag? How is this not crashing the game? The most iconic bit of the movie is when all the zombies act like ants and form a massive tower to try and scale over some large walls, and that happens quite frequently in this game too. It really makes the game stand out from other zombie games out there. This isn't the kind of game I normally go for, but I had fun with this one. We cross over the dividing wall and head into Palestine. Okay, now we can use the original Assassin's Creed. In this Assassin's Creed game, you play a historical character in a historical setting, trying to retrieve a powerful artifact of a long-lost civilization, before the evil Templars do. So basically the plot of every single Assassin's Creed game ever made. In this game we play as Altair, as he journeys across the Middle East during the Crusades. Just don't worry about why he's white and speaks an American accent. One of the 3 main cities we can visit is Jerusalem, and they've done a great job of recreating the old town. It's a very shrunk down version, but the layout is pretty accurate, and we can find a few landmarks that you can still visit today. The most famous of which is the Dome of the Rock, with its iconic golden dome. Next door is Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the Church of Holy Scripture, and all are pretty accurate recreations. We can also find the old wall that runs all the way around the perimeter of the map, and all in all, it's a nice creation of the old city, which means of course we're on the Palestinian side of the border. Although in this time period, Palestine and Israel don't actually exist yet as countries, and we're technically in the Seljuk Empire right now, but this is where modern day Palestine sits, so that's all that matters. And plus we can leave the city and head out into the countryside, riding across the West Bank. This is the very first Assassin's Creed, and may not be quite as historically accurate as the others, as the franchise hadn't figured out what it wanted to be yet. The story technically takes place in the modern day, and you step into a machine called the Animus to relive ancient memories of your ancestors, which is a really cool idea at the time, but I think is a choice that the developers now regret, as it now feels like something that had to be inconveniently shoved into the more modern games, as this side of the story definitely takes a back seat. The gameplay of this one isn't very fluid, and gets quite repetitive, but it definitely laid the groundwork for the true masterpieces that would come later in the franchise. Next on the list is Jordan, and we're heading to a time period that is often overlooked in video games. The First World War in Battlefield 1. We're in the Ottoman Empire, but if you look at the campaign selection map, the missions clearly take place where Jordan sits today. In these 3 missions we play the legendary Lawrence of Arabia's assistant, as she attempts to take down a monstrously heavily armed train that's been terrorizing the region. The first level takes place at a train wreck in the middle of the desert. Well, Jordan is about 85% desert, so this is correct. The next level, well, more desert, but now with added rocky escarpments. There's also a ruined temple on this level, which appears to be Roman, and is most likely based on the ruins of the ancient city of Gerasa. Roman ruins are all over the place around the Mediterranean, so for me personally, if I were designing this level, I would have taken my inspiration from the ancient city of Petra, which is famous for its ornate cliff carvings, and is a lot more unique to Jordan. Then when we fight the train, it's a very generic looking desert village made of mud huts. The huts are all painted white, but I couldn't find any examples of this being a thing in Jordan. There are about 12 billion games out there set in World War II, and you can probably count the amount of First World War games on 2 hands, so it makes for a fascinating setting. This game does take a lot of liberties with historical accuracy, and the vast majority of guns we use are prototypes that never actually saw service. But you know what, that's fine. If it was historically accurate, we'd just be using basic rifles, trying to stop our feet rot away because of trench foot, and then either dying a slow painful death from mustard gas, or going home and spending the rest of our days with traumatic shell shock. War sucks. We return to the Arabian Peninsula with a visit to Yemen. I've chosen Medal of Honor Warfighter for this one, which also appeared in my Europe video. The game actually starts in Yemen, for a tutorial mission where you controversially play as a terrorist. You're at a training camp, deep within a complex of caves. And later on you play as the good guys, swinging on by, sniping from little bird helicopters, and raiding the previously mentioned training camp. We find ourselves flying through wide, arid, and open valleys, but it's the villages I want to talk about, as someone has clearly done their research. The houses are made out of packed mud bricks. The windows have been adorned with white paint, and many of the houses have these striking geometric patterns. These are based on the houses you'll find in the Yemeni city of Sana'a, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So soldiers, please try and show a little respect, and don't go blowing the place up. It's of extreme cultural importance. Hey, what did I just say? But much like the game's depiction of Bosnia and Herzegovina, they're putting things in the wrong place again, as at the start of the mission it says that we're in the Abyan province, and Sana'a is way further north than this, but credit where credit is due, they have gone for a style that's very unique to Yemen. My opinion of this game hasn't changed. It's a mediocre first-person shooter, with a few interesting missions, but mostly it's just meh, and it looks kind of ugly. Next door is Oman, and the return of another game from a European video, this time Ghost Recon Rogue Spear. In this mission we head to a desalinization plant. We need to free hostages, stop contaminants being placed in the water supply. Oman does have numerous desalinization plants, it's where most of the country's water comes from, but I'm not convinced the level designers even looked at a picture of one. We find ourselves in a very generic looking industrial complex. We see a few large tanks, but there should be way more, including some gigantic ones outside which we don't see. Not just for salt water and fresh water, but also lots of different chemicals as well. And where's all the pipes? There should be a complete mess of them. Not to mention numerous pumps, machines used for treatment and filtration. And most heinous of all, the sea is missing! Where the hell are you getting your salt water from? Thin air? I know a lot of this is down to the technical limitations of the PlayStation 1, but maybe if you're a level designer in this era of gaming, Don't pick a location that's going to be 80% cylinders. I wasn't a fan of this game when I played it for my European video, and I still don't like it. I hate being harsh for such an old game, but it's just so boring and, well, basic. I'm just glad the levels are so short, normally taking less than 5 minutes. So I didn't have to play it again for very long. Now to Qatar, with its futuristic looking buildings that I thought were AI generated. But we're not seeing any of those as we head into the desert, with Transformers, the game. This follows the events of the 2007 Michael Bay movie. The game has 2 campaigns. One where you play as the Autobots, and one where you play as the faction that doesn't suck. The first few missions for the Decepticons have us heading to Qatar, specifically a US military base, where we gather intel and blow everything up. Well, this is based on a Michael Bay movie after all. The United States Air Force does have a military base in Qatar, called the Al Udeid Air Base, so that's pretty accurate. But the map is your typical generic sandy dry desert map, with the occasional nondescript ruin and small mud huts, which just happens to have a whopping great big base in the middle of it, full of angry soldiers, tanks, planes and helicopters, who don't take kindly to giant alien robots coming down and wrecking the place. I've not played this game in a long time, and I forgot how fun it was. The combat is fun and surprisingly varied, and swapping between vehicle mode and robot mode never gets old. And the transformation animations look absolutely incredible. I'm surprised the PlayStation 2 can handle them. They're so complex. Although it has to be said the game is quite buggy. Optimus Prime had whatever the robot equivalent of a stroke is with my playthrough. We continue around Arabia to Bahrain. You totally know we're picking a Formula 1 game for this one. Luckily I already own one, F1 2011. I bought this so I could use it as my original pick for Hungary during my European video in this series. So into the PlayStation 3 it went. I've just got to find Bahrain and... oh, it's not here. Yep, turns out I picked the only season in the past 20 years where this Grand Prix was cancelled due to civil unrest. Just my bleeding luck. But luckily Formula 1 2023 was on Xbox Game Pass, so I just played that. And the Bahrain racetrack is a perfect 1-to-1 recreation and looks absolutely great. There's not really much more to say than that. I mean, it's a Formula 1 racing game, that's all it does. I'm not the biggest fan of Formula 1, but I do enjoy the Netflix documentary Drive to Survive. Turns out, all I needed to make the races exciting was some tension music and some backstory. Of course, I chose my boy Lando Norris, and the speed and the handling of the cars is done really well. Although I found the game very easy, I was soon in first place. Then I remembered how much of a knob Max Verstappen is, so I shunted him into a wall, and then went on to win the race. And everyone celebrated, either because I'd won, or because I'd put Max Verstappen in hospital, maybe both. I then tweaked the settings to make the game a bit more difficult and had to go in Las Vegas, and I probably failed. And this game is a vast improvement from F1 2011, and that's all I have to say because those are the only 2 F1 games I've played. Our last stop on the Arabian Peninsula is Kuwait, and we head to the 2002 tactical shooter Conflict Desert Storm. So we couldn't avoid the Gulf War after all. In 1990, Saddam Hussein's army invaded the small country of Kuwait, and had complete control in just 2 days. 6 months later, a 42-country coalition led by the United States would commence Operation Desert Storm. This game takes you to the start of the conflict, with the first 2 missions being set in Kuwait. You get to control a squad of 4 Special Forces soldiers, or the world's best Special Forces. Sorry, of course I'm going to be biased. The first mission, you just start off with 1 soldier, and you have to go rescue a sniper to join your team. As we've already seen countless times in this video, it's a generic desert level, with plenty of sand, plenty of rocks, and a few basic buildings. Oh look, goats! And oh boy, things don't get much better for the next mission, as we head to Kuwait City, to rescue a VIP and regroup with our anti-tank specialist. This game gives you the impression that Kuwait is some quiet backwater, old-fashioned city that only got running water and electricity a few weeks ago. But in reality, if you look at Kuwait City, it's a modern sprawling metropolis, and you'd be forgiven for mistaking it for Shanghai. I thought maybe because this game was set in the 90s, all the skyscrapers must have been built over the past 25 years. But no, the Kuwait towers have been around since 1979, and many of the skyscrapers sprung up throughout the 1980s. So when Saddam came a-knockin', it was already a modern city that had gotten rich off oil reserves. Now Kuwait does have an old town that does look a little bit more traditional, but the fact we can't see a single high-rise building throughout this level is very misleading. Depictions of cities aside, this is a solid tactical shooter. Don't be fooled by the cartoony graphics. It is quite challenging, as you swap between your 4 specialists, trying to flank enemy soldiers and tanks. Permadeath is also a thing in this game, so if Oli goes down and you can't revive him, He'll be replaced in the next mission with Alan or Steve or someone who will lack all the previously gained experience. The orders you can give to your troops are very basic, but that just makes the game more accessible and less daunting to play. With Arabia and most of the Middle East done, it's time we headed back to more tropical climates and try to make our way around the rest of the Far East. Let's go to the massive archipelago of Indonesia, with the first game I ever owned, 1998's Colin McRae Rally. There are 6 stages in the Indonesian Rally, and they're very varied. Of course there's tropical jungle, but then we also get to drive along gold sandy beaches, through rice fields, swampland, mountainside, small villages, and we can even spot some temples. And they are accurate to Sumatra, where the Indonesian Rally used to take place. We can see inspiration from the more rounded towers of Prambanan, and these striking pagoda-like structures you'll find in temples such as Pura Sagara. So a very lovely retro version of Indonesia. This game means a lot to me, as it's basically where my obsession with video games began. The late 90s graphics have a charm about them, and it's something modern indie developers try to recreate to this day to create a sense of nostalgia. And the game still plays really well, as the car handling sits perfectly in between control and power sliding. It is a true classic. Now on to Singapore. It's tempting to use another Formula 1 game, as there will be perfect one-to-one recreations of Singapore out there. But I didn't want to do that, as it might make this video repetitive. So with that in mind, let's do yet another Call of Duty game. This time, Black Ops 3. This game takes place in the 2060s, and it's all about AI, robots and augmented humans. It's safe to say the version of Singapore we've seen in the game has seen better days, after being battered by superstorms brought on by climate change, and worst of all a massive chemical leak that made the city almost uninhabitable. The only people still living there are well-armed, organised crime groups. There are 3 missions that take place here, and despite all the destruction, we can spot a few landmarks that are still standing, including Marina Bay Sands with its observation deck, the National Gallery, the giant glass domes of the Botanical Gardens, and the Singapore Flyer Ferris wheel that should have definitely blown over by now. Oh wait, never mind. And coolest of all, the Super Tree Grove, which looks great in this game. When I first played Black Ops 3, I had no idea this place existed, and assumed it was just somewhere invented for the game. But they actually exist, and that's awesome. Black Ops 3 is one of my least favourite Call of Duty games. The campaign is designed to be played in co-op, so it lacks the linear focus compared to other games in the franchise, and it's just constantly throwing things at you. There's just way too many enemies. It just doesn't feel as cinematic as some of the other games, although I did enjoy some of the twists and turns of the story regarding AI, which leads to some very trippy moments, but there are far better Call of Duty games out there. It's time to take off Bangladesh, and things are about to get a bit ridiculous. Splinter Cell Blacklist is the only game so far that has appeared in my Europe and South American video, and will you know it, it returns once again to deliver us Bangladesh. But now here comes the stupid part. Bangladesh is only available by playing through the co-op missions. This meant to get the shots I needed, I had to play through the game on my own. Most of the time this was easy, as it's primarily a stealth game. I could put one character somewhere quiet, whilst I did all the dirty work with the other, until the time came when they were both needed to open a door or something. But this task came almost impossible, the explosive climax to one of the missions, where both players need to make a run to the exit, whilst everything is exploding around them. I'm not going to tell you how long this took to do. I should have really just invited a friend over at this point. But somehow I did it, and here we are, Bangladesh. I'm going to cover up half the screen because that's very distracting. We head to the shipbreakers' yards in Chittagong, which feels like a location basically made for video games. But it is a real place. A real, very miserable and horrible place. Being a shipbreaker is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. There's literally no health and safety here. Workers frequently fall to their deaths or are crushed. Not to mention the exposure to harsh chemicals. So that's depressing. Cool backdrop for a video game though, I guess. Yay! We see a small part of the city at the end of the level as we make our way down a street and through a large abandoned building. There's a few rickshaw taxis dotted around for good measure, and the ornate facade of the building does match that of the region. I've already reviewed this game twice before. It's fine. Anyway, next. Myanmar, or Burma as it used to be called. In a strange coincidence, I had 2 games to choose from, and both were World War II arcade flying games. Secret Weapons Over Normandy and Blazing Angels 2. Secret Weapons Over Normandy is my favourite of the 2, but the depiction of Burma in that game is rather boring. It's just basically jungle. So let's go for Blazing Angels 2, as we fly over the city of Rangoon, which is now called Yangon. This city saw a lot of combat and bombing during the Second World War, due to its strategic significance, with lots of industry, a dock, and river crossings. In this mission we're defending the city from an invasion, engaging in dogfights, attacking enemy ground forces, and bombing bridges. The main landmark we see is the massive golden Shui Dagong Pagoda, which dominates the map. Luckily it doesn't get blown up, as it's still around today. But other than that, I couldn't spot any other real life landmarks. The layout is pretty accurate, with the docks down in the south, and the city being almost entirely surrounded by rivers. The townhouses we see are mostly single or two-story wooden shacks, which is completely inaccurate. Rangoon should have a proper built-up city centre, with 3 or 4-story brick buildings, all tightly packed together. This is another game I haven't touched for years, and it's way better than I remember. The missions are varied in both scenery and gameplay, and the plane handling and combat is a lot of fun. But don't go into this game expecting realism. It's completely over the top with Tesla coils, heavily armoured zeppelins, and a giant cargo plane that launches tiny jet fighters, and other wacky, historically inaccurate crap. But maybe you're into that kind of thing. Next on the list is Laos. And I'm sorry to do this to you guys again, but it's literally the only game I have set in Laos. Call of Duty Black Ops. Hey, at least it's one of the good ones. The events of this game take place in the Cold War and Vietnam War, with the conflict of the latter spilling over across the border into Laos. In one mission, we're taking a leisurely boat trip, where we blow up half the forest. We are looking for a crashed Soviet plane that was transporting a dangerous chemical. We find it, we get captured, then the game recreates the events from the Deer Hunter movie. We commandeer a helicopter and blow up the other half of the forest. The main part of the country we see is jungle, specifically along a river flanked with steep slopes, covered in deep jungle or with sheer rock cliff faces. And if you head onto Google Earth and explore the Laotian-Vietnamese border, you'll soon find terrain just like this. But without the title cards at the start, we could easily just be in Vietnam. We don't see anything specifically Laotian. I do feel like there's way too much infrastructure going on in these missions though. But then again, we do need stuff to blow up. We see a few rice fields on our journey down the river, which is accurate to the region, but the oil pipelines aren't, as there are no oil fields in Laos. The original Black Ops is one of the best Call of Duties out there. It has a very intriguing story, which had everyone questioning, "The numbers, Mason, what do they mean?" The missions are action-packed and varied as we travel all over the world, and the Cold War setting made for an interesting change from all the World War II and modern-day shooters of the time. Here comes Cambodia. In Tomb Raider 4 and The Last Revelation. Bit of an ironic title considering at least 20 other Tomb Raider games came out after this one. The game starts off in Cambodia, specifically in Angkor Wat, a landmark so famous they put it on the country's flag. And of course you said Tomb Raider game here, just look at it. This level is a flashback, where a creepy old German man, armed with a bowie knife, escorts a young teenage Lara Croft, unaccompanied around an abandoned temple. Seems a little shady if you ask me. This level is mainly here to introduce the story, but also teaches the ropes of how to move around, jump over gaps, climb, crawl, that sort of thing. Considering how old this game is, done a decent job at recreating Angkor Wat. We can just about spot the iconic domes of the pagodas, but someone definitely did their research here, as the giant stone faces we see, and the lion statues, and basically all the carvings on the wall, all match temples in Cambodia. The original game must have used photos of real-life carvings to create the 2D textures for the walls. But where is everyone? Angkor Wat was rediscovered in the 1800s, and today now receives 500,000 visitors every year. But this level takes place in 1984. Angkor Wat was a lot harder to get to back then. There just wasn't the infrastructure, and was only receiving about 7,000 visitors a year. So it's feasible that they've snuck off to a quiet part of the temple, and the level does start with us smashing through the ceiling, so checks out. Tomb Raider 4 is often called the most difficult of all the early Tomb Raider games. I wouldn't say it's the most difficult, but it's by far the most annoying. It's just so difficult to understand where you have to go and what you have to do. Some of the levels are massive, sprawling labyrinths, with endless locked doors and endless keys to open said locked doors. It's just very frustrating, and I kept having to resort to guides with my playthrough. Maybe that's the point of the game. Maybe the whole thing was designed to sell physical paper strategy guides back in the day. That's my theory and I'm sticking to it. It's not me being completely dumb, surely. Up next we have the Philippines, an archipelago in the Pacific Ocean. My game of choice for these islands is Medal of Honor Rising Sun, a classic World War II shooter focusing on the war in the Pacific. We head to the town of Kalumpit, where we need to destroy a bridge to slow down the advancing Japanese forces. And this is a battle that really happened. The bridge isn't an exact recreation of the one that was destroyed, but it is still a long metal truss bridge. The buildings we see around town are period appropriate, and we can find a few landmarks as we play through the level, but this statue doesn't exist, and this church is very basic and looks nothing like the gorgeous one you'll find in the real town. We also pass through a baseball field. There isn't one in Calumpit today, but baseball did used to be a lot more popular, mainly with US troops who were stationed there. But one nice little detail is the billboards we can find at the baseball stadium are written in Tagalog, the national language of the Philippines. Medal of Honor Frontline is still one of my favourite first-person shooters, so this game had big boots to fill back in the day. And the war in the Pacific made an interesting change, as the vast majority of World War II games took place in Europe. It's still fun to play today, even with the classic controls, and has some truly memorable moments, especially the opening with the attack on Pearl Harbor. And with its cliffhanger ending, I can't wait to find out what happens next. It's only been, more than 2 decades? I'm sure it'll be ready any day now.
Is as close to your brother as you will ever get.
It was at this point, with 9 countries remaining, I'd run out of games set in Asia. But you know me, I'm not going to give up, especially when I'm so close. It was off to the internet and second-hand game stores to track down the final 9 countries. If that was even possible. Let's start with Mongolia, because that hole in the middle of the map is really annoying me. I thought this one would be easy. It's a well-known but barren country with an interesting history, but I struggled to find a physical copy of a game that would work in my consoles. So unfortunately I had to resort to mobile gaming. Ugh. With Asphalt Extreme. A spin-off from the Asphalt series sees you driving off-road, which seems a little ironic for a series called Asphalt, but then again, the name Dirt was already taken. So I downloaded the game, and for some reason I had to use my Netflix account to sign in. And then I found it, the Gobi Desert. And, oh man, where do we even begin with this one? The level designers basically wanted to build Mad Max World, and why they chose to call it the Gobi Desert is anyone's guess. The Gobi is primarily a vast area of sand dunes, with a few areas of sandstone rock formations. But the rock formations we see in the game look way more like volcanic rock, which just isn't in this region. It also looks a bit too green compared to what you'd find in the Gobi Desert, and there's certainly no massive waterfall there, or giant shipwrecks. And I couldn't find any aeroplane graveyards, or whatever the hell these things are. This racetrack is basically a load of nonsense. I mean, it's a really cool design, but there are no parallels to reality. The Asphalt games used to be a guilty pleasure of mine, back when I used to partake in a little bit of mobile gaming. It's fun and I absolutely love the track design, but you know, it's a mobile game. It's constantly trying to get you to spend money with microtransactions and annoying pop-ups and ads. When will someone make a fun arcade racer like this for consoles again? Please! Without all this mobile game garbage. Turkmenistan proved to be the most elusive of the stands, but now I can finally check it off the list, with the tactical shooter SOCOM Navy SEALs. The last 3 levels of the campaign take place in Turkmenistan. First we're liberating an informant from a prison in the middle of the desert. Then we're heading into a terrorist camp within a cave system to find and disarm 2 nuclear suitcase bombs in the middle of a desert. And the final mission has us heading to an abandoned city to take down the terrorist leaders in the middle of a desert. Just when I thought we were done with the generic desert levels, here we are again. But to be fair, Turkmenistan is mostly desert, and the landscape we see around us isn't too dissimilar from Yangikala Canyon which you'll find in the country. The final mission baffles me though, as we find ourselves in an abandoned town that's been completely destroyed, and the tank wrecks here means we're standing in the middle of a war zone. This was no natural disaster. Other than a few small skirmishes along the border with Afghanistan, Turkmenistan hasn't had a major war in recent years. There aren't any giant terrorist cells in Turkmenistan. It's a very secretive country, ruled under a dictatorship, so choosing this country really doesn't make a lot of sense. I played this game's sequel for my Europe video, and I wasn't very kind, saying I found it annoying and overly complicated, but I also said that was more of a me problem. Because the gameplay I needed was in the last 3 levels, I actually had to play through the whole campaign, so I actually had to learn how to play the game properly. And in the end, I enjoyed it. There's a huge list of commands you can give to your squad, but most of the time you'll only end up using 3 or 4 of them. The soldiers generally do what they're told and will take out the bad guys, but occasionally during fighting in a few cramped interiors, they'll forget how to aim and be killed off by the enemy, and there's no revive, so you better hope the rest of your squad doesn't go down. I definitely judged this franchise too harshly last time. It's a solid tactical shooter. Timor Leste, aka East Timor, aka where? I consider myself a bit of a geography nerd, but I must admit I hadn't even heard of this country before making this video. But luckily for me, Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow had heard of this country, as it's where the game opens and serves as the tutorial level. The US embassy in the country has been taken over by terrorists, having to sneak in and rescue the ambassador and other hostages. We start off at a small village by a tropical beach with palm trees, and sitting next to the Indonesian archipelago, this is the exact sort of ecosystem we'd expect to see. I know these wooden stilted shacks are a bit of a tropical beach cliche. It would have been cool to see some of these tall boys, which is a traditional Timor Leste hut, and something quite specific to the country. When you reach the embassy, it's a colonial style building, and this is very typical of what you'll find in towns across the country. This was my first time playing one of the classic Splinter Cell games, which are all about stealth, and I have to say I struggled, even with the tutorial level, as it wasn't always clear what it wanted me to do. I think back in the day I probably would have really enjoyed this game. It feels very much like a puzzle, when to hide, when to try and take down people, but looking at it with a modern lens, the controls feel counterintuitive, and the game is just so damn dark. This being a PS2 title, ideally it should be plugged into an old school CRT television, using a SCART connection, but with a modern day setup you need an HDMI adapter which makes everything darker, making the game basically unplayable unless you're using night vision goggles. That's in-game obviously, I'm not sat in the couch in my man cave with NV goggles on my head, so a lifetime ago I probably would have really enjoyed this. Up next is Bhutan, awesome flag by the way, with Override Mech City Brawl. This is a brawler, where you pilot a giant mech, and you travel the world beating up other giant mechs and kaiju. With many countries to choose from across the world, I'm so glad they picked Bhutan, because there aren't that many games out there set in this tiny country. The Bhutan we see in the game is a village and a temple that sits in a lake on top of a waterfall, surrounded by rocky spires. The houses we see in the village are very typical of the style you'll see in Bhutan, constructed of dark wooden timbers with overhanging roofs, and walls painted in white. I couldn't find an exact match for this temple, but its style does match that of Bhutanese architecture. And although building a temple on top of a waterfall might seem pretty ridiculous, Bhutan does seem to have a habit of putting temples in precarious places, like Paro Taktsang, which clings to the side of a mountain. So if Bhutan did have a waterfall this tall, they could have well tried to build a temple above it. This game reminds me a lot of old school Godzilla games. The combat is fun and surprisingly varied, with many different moves, power-ups, even melee weapons and guns you can pick up. The arenas are small but very colourful and varied, and filled with destructible buildings. There's a huge variety in the different mechs as well, all with their own unique style and personality. I wouldn't usually play this kind of game myself, but I had fun with this one. Time for a story about Brunei, and I hope you're sitting comfortably. Apparently the only game set in Brunei is Virtua Tennis 4, so I bought the game and thought this would be done and dusted in less than half an hour. I'd go on the game, go in arcade mode, pick the Brunei tennis court, and that would be that. Oh no, it wouldn't be that simple. Brunei had to be unlocked. So Tim Henman Jr. was born. And so onto the world tour I went. At this point, the simple tennis video game turns into a global board game. You hop around the map, choosing how far you want to travel, racking up experience points, playing minigames, playing tennis matches and tournaments against virtual tennis players. But there was a problem. Brunei wasn't featured on this map, which is very strange. So I started playing, and no Brunei. I did some research. The only way I was going to unlock tennis courts was to actually be good at the game. So I started again, and Maria She Fell Over was born. I played through the world tour again, and was doing slightly better, but still wasn't unlocking anything. I thought maybe if I completed the world tour, it then might begin a second world tour, where this time I actually get to go through Brunei. But no, if you complete the world tour, you just complete the world tour, and then you have to start again. So then I started the world tour for a third time, but by this time I'd gotten really good at the game. I was winning everything. I was unlocking all the courts, but halfway through this world tour, still no elusive Brunei. I was starting to doubt whether this country was even in the game, but I found multiple sources saying it was, so it had to be in here somewhere. But I couldn't find out how on earth I unlocked it. After looking at screenshots that showed every single court unlocked, it had to be this one here. And I did even more research, still no Brunei. But then I found out about this dude, Duke, a bonus character you can unlock by playing through the arcade mode and not losing a single game, and the tennis court you play him on is the one I needed. By now I'd mastered the game. It took a couple of attempts, but with some help from Roger Federer, I'd made it, finally, Brunei, to face off against Duke, and he kicked my ass. But I'd never been so happy to lose a game of tennis. What I thought would take half an hour took closer to 14 hours to do. And for what? A tennis court that doesn't even resemble anything in reality? I mean, yeah, it looks awesome. No tennis courts, stadiums or theatres look like this in Brunei. It's obviously just a wacky bonus stage. And I have to say, this was a really good tennis game. It plays really well, the mini-games keep it fun and interesting, and this wasn't the horrible chore I thought it would be. I really did genuinely enjoy playing this game. But with that said, I never want to play it, ever, again. We are so close to finishing this now, as we travel to Taiwan, with Alpha Protocol. Not gonna lie, that's a terrible name. This game describes itself as an espionage RPG, which had me intrigued. You play Jack Bauer, Ethan Hunt, Michael Thornton. After a passenger jet is shot down by a missile, you're sent to investigate, uncovering an even wider conspiracy, which means you have to become a rogue agent and travel the world to stop an even bigger threat. You know, standard espionage shit. One of the plots has you going to Taipei, the capital city of Taiwan, to stop an assassination attempt on the president of Taiwan. We visit a few locations, including a rather grand hotel. The hotel's a bit too over the top. This feels more like an oriental themed hotel in Las Vegas, rather than a real one you'd find in the country. We go to an area called the slums, which is your standard dirty urban environment, but with a few signs around the place written Chinese to remind you that you're in Taiwan. But I was delighted to see that the metro trains have the correct liveries, so not a bad looking metro. But the main place I'm going to look at is Memorial Park, which we visit in the final climactic mission in this story arc. And it's a real place. Much like the hotel, it's a bit over the top rather than realistic, but in real life the park does contain multiple ponds, humped bridges, and pagodas. We also get a glimpse of Taipei 101, this tall and very famous skyscraper, but it's just a low-resolution 2D backdrop that you barely notice. Eventually we end up at Memorial Hall, and the model is close but not quite right. It looks like the level designer modelled it from memory, rather than any kind of reference photo. The roof shape especially is completely wrong, but at least the memorial arch that we can see opposite is correct. So a mixed bag with this one. This is a really cool idea for a video game. Obviously it's a role-playing game, so you can go into situations stealthy and non-lethally, or just shoot the place up. You can specialise in shooting, hacking, lockpicking, that sort of thing. And there are dialogue trees with 3 different options. You can either be professional, an arsehole, or trying to get laid. Unfortunately the game is quite poorly executed in my opinion. I know it's an RPG and you're supposed to level up and specialise into different skills, but at the start of the game it just seems daft that I'm a special agent and I can't pull off the perfect headshot on a person standing 20 meters away from me. The missions also felt quite repetitive, and overall the experience is just, well, fine. I've only played through the game as far as I needed to get the footage, so I can't say if the choices I made make a huge impact in later missions, or how different the game would be if I'd chosen different dialogue options, or played slightly different. Maybe one day I'll come back and finish it, but honestly I doubt it. As much as I love the idea, I found it all very mediocre. 3 countries to go as we head to Sri Lanka, and we take to the skies with air conflict specific carriers. This is an aerial combat strategy game, where you can play as the Japanese or the Americans. We take part in air battles across the Indian and Pacific Ocean during World War II. In the Japanese campaign we head to Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka. We're here to disrupt British forces. They have an airbase here, as well as many ships. So obviously a big dilemma for me. Making me take part in Pearl Harbor? This is fine. Making me shoot down one British Hurricane? How dare you! The main landmark we see in the city is a temple, but it looks nothing like the one you'll find in real life Colombo. I'm not sure if it's a reused asset or something, because it looks way more like the kind of temples you'll find in Vietnam or Cambodia. Maybe there was a typo with the reference photos. Colombo, Cambodia, easy mistake to make. I didn't have high hopes for the rest of the level design, especially when I saw this river that has the twists and turns to make it look like it's been crafted by a level designer. But no, turns out that's what the river actually looks like in real life. And the layout of the city is generally pretty good, with the docks in the right place, and the buildings in the city actually looking like a proper colonial city, with period appropriate buildings, and not a bunch of wooden shacks. I'm looking at you, Blazing Angels! This is a great airplane game. One thing I particularly like is that unlike other similar games, you get to control a whole squad of aircraft. So once you've used up your bombs and bullets, you have to swap to another aircraft, which is way more realistic than having a plane that can carry 30 respawnable bombs and has the armor of a main battle tank. Your squadron will fly around and do its own thing as you're piloting a specific aircraft. They will kind of help you out with the objectives, but it'll be mostly down to you. You'll fly a mix of 3 types of aircraft: fighters, dive and torpedo bombers. The graphics are good and highly detailed, and the planes handle really well in arcade mode. I did briefly try the simulation controls, but I found them a bit too floaty. So I was impressed with this one. It was a lot more grounded and realistic compared to the other 2 World War II airplane games I own. Our penultimate Asian country is Lebanon, with Sum of All Fears. This game is based on the movie that's based on the novel by Tom Clancy, and plays like a Tom Clancy game, but it's not a Tom Clancy game. I couldn't spot little Tommy on the box art, just Ben Affleck and Morgan Freeman, and they're not even in the game. This game takes place in a world where terrorism is running rampant, and after an attack on a stadium, the WMDs are traced back to a facility in Lebanon. And after we blow those up and gather intel, we head to an abandoned prison that is serving as the group's headquarters, which is also in Lebanon. We only get a brief view of outside before we head underground, and it's a rocky canyon with some deciduous trees. And to be fair, you will find those in Lebanon. I'm just glad they didn't think, well, this is the Middle East. It must be a desert country. But then when we go inside, it's just your standard, dull bunker mission. And the prison level is more of the same, to be honest. They could have at least written the signs in Arabic rather than English. It wouldn't have been much, but it would have been something. This is your pretty standard PlayStation 2 tactical shooter, a genre I hadn't played until making these videos. But it turns out there's loads of them. You control a squad of soldiers you can swap between, and most missions also have other friendly AI squads who are pushing towards the same objective. Your AI allies are normally pretty smart until they're not, and so are the enemy soldiers. But honestly, there's nothing special about this one that makes it stand out from the other tactical shooters I've played recently. Okay, last one. Ah yes, Armenia. Many of you thought this country should have been in my European video, especially because I included Azerbaijan and Georgia, and you're probably right. So it's nice to finally cross Armenia off the list. But this was a difficult one. I couldn't find any console games out there set in Armenia, so I had to turn to my mobile phone yet again. I found one called High Zinvor, which is one of these unlimited runner games, but is set in the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But my phone wouldn't let me download this one. It decided it was riddled with viruses or something. But then I learned about another Armenian game, Shadowmatic. It's a puzzle game. You're given an abstract shape, which you need to manipulate and spin around, until its shadow creates a familiar shape. And if you think this game is ripping off the puzzles from Resident Evil Biohazard, it's the other way around, mate. Like I said, this game was developed by an Armenian studio, so it makes sense that they take inspiration from the world around them. I'd love to say these stone pillars and spheres are based on an Armenian temple or museum, but unfortunately it's just an abstract background. But hey, they do put up Christmas trees in Armenia. And you could say this rocky background isn't too dissimilar from the symphony of rock you'll find in the country's Garni Gorge. So yeah, I can't prove this game is set in Armenia, but there's no evidence saying that it isn't. And if you think this game choice is cheating, here I am flying over the Armenian capital of Yerevan in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So I'll let you choose which one of these two games you think I should pick to represent the country. This game won some awards, and it is a very chilled out experience. It's amazing how fast it goes from, what the hell am I looking at, to, oh, it's an elephant. So yeah, a nice chilled puzzler. And with that, oh my god, I've done it! Yes! And I'm happy with this list. They're all legitimate games, set in their legitimate countries. And I didn't have to resort to any shady tactics like with my South America and European videos. Well, what a relief. The biggest continent ticked off my list. I've been working on this project on and off for the past 6 months, gathering all the footage and editing together. And all of that was done by just me. Every single footage of gameplay, all the research, I don't have an editor, just me. So I'd really appreciate it if you could like, share, leave a comment, help this video and my channel find an audience. But there's still 3 more continents out there. Where to next? North America, Africa, or Oceania? I'm determined to get this planet done. So, stay safe in your travels out there, people. I'm Foolish Pedro, and I'll see you in the next one.